Hey guys, what's up? It is the one and only RJ21 here, and today I'm going to be recapping week 7 of Big Brother Canada 12, including the double eviction, and giving my updated power rankings. And I apologize if I sound super nasally. Spring seems to be in full swing and allergies are absolutely kicking my butt, but I promise I will power through this to get this video out to y'all. Week 7 starts off with the BB Can Fitness Factory HOH competition, which is an endurance competition in which HouseGuests have to balance a ball on a bowed out platform connected to their hips, and they have to move their hips to balance the platform out. If their ball drops, they are out of the competition. After a specific period of time, they would go to the advanced class, in which they would change the ball, which is much more difficult to balance. Ultimately, the competition comes down to Todd and Tola, with Tola coming out on top and winning his first HOH competition of the season. This week should be a pretty straightforward week. Tola has a pretty apparent target in Avery because Avery has constantly targeted Tola in the past, and Tola has a pawn in mind in Bayleigh, wanting to ensure that Avery is the one that goes home. However, Anthony's being a little bit sneaky this week, and throughout this week he is laying the groundwork to paint Spicy V or Victoria as a much bigger target. So in the future, the groundwork is there to take the shot at Victoria. But he doesn't want her to go home this week because obviously that would put a massive target on his back and that would just ruin a lot of the foundational work he has done. But he is just trying to lay out the groundwork. However, on the other side of the house, the women in Avery, Victoria, and Bayleigh come to the realization that the only way all three of these women can stay together is if Todd is the one who ends up on the block and he is the one that ends up going home. Even though he is technically on their side, Todd is the only way to ensure that all of the women stay together. One special thing about this HOH competition is that it actually came with a prize, and that prize was a strategy session with Big Brother Canada 10 winner Kevin Jacobs. And this is an amazing reward. I don't know why it came this week of all weeks, but this is probably the best reward a house guest could receive. I heard some people complaining like, oh, I would have wished another winner would have came through, but it's Kevin Jacobs, arguably one of, if not the best winners in the history of Big Brother Canada, and probably one of the best players of all time. So getting a strategy session with him was an absolute benefit to Tola. Did he actually use it to his benefit? No, not really. He kind of just listened in and just took in what Kevin was saying, which was a good thing, but I feel like he could have optimized it a bit more, but that's ultimately what happens. Tola decides to be upfront with Avery and tells her that, that she is the target and that he is putting her up on the block. And he does the same thing with Bayleigh, telling her that she's going to be going up on the block, but she's only going up as a pawn, as to not want to team to blindside either of them. So, come the nomination ceremony, Tola chooses to nominate Avery and Bayleigh, with Avery being the target and Bayleigh being the pawn. But Tola does have some choice words for Bayleigh, saying that he's faster than her, stronger than her, and better looking than her, and he got an HOH competition win before her, trying to rub it in her face a little bit. Now, typically this wouldn't be that big of a deal, right? It's obviously a joke. Tola's just trying to play around and have a little bit of fun, but Bayleigh doesn't see it that way. She takes this to heart, and she makes a really big deal out of this, having a near blow up in the HOH room, calling out Tola for embarrassing her and how it was such an embarrassment, and it was such a Bayleigh thing to do. It was so funny just seeing how she reacted to the entire situation. I mean, like, it was just funny to watch, in all honesty. Avery and Bayleigh, alongside Victoria, Anthony, and Todd, are all chosen to compete in the Power Veto competition. However, before the Power Veto competition, Victoria is trying to lay out some seeds of doubt to hopefully put herself in a better position moving forward. So she decides to lie to Lexus and say that Todd is coming after her if he were to win power. And she also decides to lie to Anthony, saying that if Todd were to win a competition, Todd would be targeting Anthony, and Anthony is the primary target, which does upset Anthony to a certain extent, because Anthony knows Victoria's lying. Anthony can see right through what Victoria's trying to do, and he's not buying it. The veto competition is revealed to be eyes in the sky, in which the house guests have to count the stars that appear on the screen with their buzzer. The closest one to the actual total of stars will win the power of veto. However, throughout the competition, temptations were going to be offered. And if you accepted a temptation, you would have to put a blindfold on for the amount of time you bid, stopping you from being able to count the stars within that certain period of time. The house guests all seem relatively decent at this competition, but ultimately, Todd unexpectedly wins this power veto competition, winning his first power veto of the season. The women are absolutely devastated, as the one hope they had in all three of the women staying this week and Todd going up on the block is now an impossibility, guaranteeing that one of the three women will be going home. However, Todd does have a bit of doubt in his mind because he's considering whether or not to use the power veto on Bayleigh. On the one hand, he wants to use the power veto on Bayleigh because Bayleigh literally saved him last week. So it would make perfect sense for him to use it on Bayleigh. However, he believes that if he were to use the power veto on Bayleigh, Victoria would most definitely be the replacement nominee, and that would create a lot of chaos, and it would be a little bit unnecessary. So Todd does have that bit of a conflict in his mind. However, he ultimately comes to his decision, as at the power veto ceremony, Todd chooses not to use the power veto, leaving the nominations intact, guaranteeing that one of Avery or Bayleigh will be going home. Avery tries to do her campaigning to her close allies. She knows she has the vote of Victoria, so it's a matter of ensuring that her fellow Hot Chocolate Alliance members in Lexus and Anthony stay loyal to their words. She goes to Lexus and has her conversations, but Lexus already knows that she's going to vote to evict Avery. Avery then goes and has her conversations with Anthony, and Anthony tries to allude to the fact that he's most likely not going to keep her, but he still tries to maintain some civility. Ultimately, it all comes into fruition as, come the live eviction vote, Avery is evicted in a vote of 3-1, with Victoria being the only person to vote to keep her, officially becoming the 8th house guest evicted from the Big Brother Canada 12 house and the 3rd member of the jury. However, we're not done yet, as Arissa announces that it is going to be a classic Big Brother double eviction, meaning that another house guest is going to be leaving the Big Brother Canada house the same night. The HOH competition is revealed to be the Race to the Sum HOH competition, in which house guests will have to count the numbers on bibs of people that are going to be running through the Big Brother Canada house and add up that sum. Whoever comes closest to the total sum will win the head of household competition. What's interesting about this competition is that the runners are actually Big Brother Canada alumni, which is really interesting to see. Seeing people like Tara, Rohan, and Tashawn from Big Brother Canada 9, Cindy from Big Brother Canada's 3 and 5. It was all just really fun to see. And a random producer. Because yeah. Anyways, all of the house guests lock in their answers, and it's revealed that Victoria is the closest to the actual answer with her answer of 1, 2, 3, 4. Of course, if Victoria would win that with that number. I mean, that's honestly so iconic and so funny that she won with that. But Victoria ends up winning her 3rd HOH competition of the season. Now, it seems pretty obvious what Victoria is going to do. She's going to nominate and target Tola because Tola is on the opposite side of the house. Tola is a huge physical threat, and he needs to be taken out when he has the opportunity to only compete in one competition. However, the question of who the pawn sitting next to Tola is going to be is a little bit up in the air. However, Bayleigh immediately gets to work and solidifies that if Todd is on the block, Todd will go home because Anthony and Lexus will vote to evict him. So, Bayleigh is campaigning hard for Lexus to be the pawn sitting next to Tola, while Anthony and Lexus are campaigning hard to try and convince Victoria that they're not going to vote to evict Todd over Tola. However, Bayleigh intervenes in that conversation and completely shuts down any sort of idea of Todd going up on the block as a pawn. So, come the nomination ceremony, Victoria chooses to nominate Tola and Lexus, with Tola being the target and Lexus being the pawn. With Victoria being the HOH, everybody else in Tola, Lexus, Anthony, Bayleigh, and Todd all compete in the power veto competition. And this is actually a pretty fair and interesting one. It was a bubble bat in which house guests had 250 bubbles, which were essentially just balls. Each house guest had 250 bubbles that they had to drain out of their tub. The first house guest to drain all of them and hit their buzzer would win the power veto. It actually seemed pretty fair and even throughout, but ultimately Todd ends up winning this power veto competition, winning his second power veto in a row. Now, Todd immediately goes to Anthony and Victoria and tells the both of them that he's not going to use the power veto because he doesn't want to jeopardize anybody's game, which is great for Victoria, but is absolutely devastating for Anthony, as Anthony comes to the unfortunate realization that one of his close allies will most definitely be going home in this double eviction. So, come the veto ceremony, Todd chooses to stick to his word and chooses not to use the power of veto, leaving Victoria's nominations intact, guaranteeing one of Tola or Lexus will be leaving the Big Brother house that night. There is some last-minute campaigning from the both of them, but ultimately, come the live eviction vote, Tola is evicted in a unanimous 3-0 vote, officially becoming the 9th HouseGuest evicted from the Big Brother Canada 12 house and the 4th member of the jury. Now it's time to get into the power rankings. At number 7, the first HouseGuest evicted this week, we have Avery. And thank God she's finally out of the house. I was getting sick of how cocky she was getting. She was on some sort of moral high ground and high horse last week, talking about, I would never betray my allies, and all this, that, and the third. And it's like, you said, like, never betray your allies, yet you pulled off possibly one of the biggest betrayals of this season in targeting Kayla. And you got the exact same result as what Vivek happened when he blindsided Dennis, in that you were taken out the very next round. That just shows you that if you have allies in this game, you need to keep them safe. If you have somebody like a Kayla who is undyingly loyal to you, you don't target them. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Even if you have those doubts, you don't take them out when you have immediate targets who you know will take you out. You had Tola on the block last week, and you chose to keep him over Kayla. Like, you've been working with Kayla for literally from the beginning up until this point. But up until this point, because of this one seed of doubt, it's absolutely astonishing. And for her to be like, I'm the best player in this house, and that's why I'm going home, and that's why I'm on the block. Like, this is, like, delusional. She's delusional. I'm not saying she played a horrible game, but for her to say she's the best player in the house when Victoria and Anthony are both still sitting right there, it comes off as arrogant. It comes off as cocky. I really haven't liked her demeanor this entire season. It definitely does come off really arrogant, and I personally don't like it. And I would be perfectly fine never seeing her play again, because she was the wannabe of the season. She was Spicy V's lapdog who was just doing everything that she wanted, and it seemed like she had no sort of personal autonomy outside of that. She tried and claimed she's this really good player, when in actuality, I don't think that's the case, which is why she's here and finishing here at number 7. At number 6, the second HouseGuest evicted this week, we have Tola. And I'm honestly surprised by Tola. Not necessarily in like the game he played, but his longevity. I definitely would not have predicted that Tola would make it to top 6. Like, making it to top 6 is honestly really impressive, considering that he was a target from literally week 1. Like, the fact that he's made it this far is honestly very impressive. It does go to show that Tola actually does have a shockingly decent social game. I thought that's where he probably struggled the most, as he really committed to one side of the house. But it turns out that holding true to your loyalties actually does pay off. Who would have thought that staying loyal to your allies would actually have benefits in this game? Apparently Avery didn't think that. That's why she took out Kayla. But Tola actually played a pretty decent game. He was well-rounded in competitions. He had solid allies. He just wasn't the most well-rounded in terms of covering all of his bases in terms of his social game. He was doing that a little bit in starting to pick up Todd as a close ally, but obviously we never see that fruit bear anything of like worth for him, because Todd doesn't use the veto on him and votes to evict him. So take that as you will. But Tola actually played pretty decently this season. He stuck loyal to his allies, but he didn't ever branch out until like the very, very end. But honestly, it was too little too late. He was already too big of a threat to keep in the house, especially with how those endgame comps were going to play out. Even though Tola was bragging and saying, I feel like I'm going to win everything, when he didn't. Still though, there is that possibility of him winning everything, and you definitely don't want to keep that around. So it was smart for them to get rid of Tola at this point. And I'm pretty pleased with how he played. I don't think he was arrogant like how Avery was. He definitely did have his cocky moments and how he said like I'm gonna win everything and things like that. But he never really came off as like super like cocky in that sense. You know, I always thought of his ego as a bit of a joking manner, but maybe that's just like how I'm trying to perceive it. But overall, I'm pretty satisfied with how Tola did on this season. He did surprisingly well, and I would not be the most opposed to seeing him come back for a future season. Do I think he's going to come back? Most likely not, but that's just how the cookie crumbles, which is why he's here at number 6. Now it's time to talk about the players that are actually still in the house. At number 5, the house guest I believe to be in the worst position in the house is Todd. And what's interesting about Todd is that I don't actually think he's that poorly positioned. I mean, he does have his solid allies in Bayleigh and now Victoria, and he still does have a solid connection with Anthony. The issue is that we're at a point in the game where having those decent connections isn't enough. If you're not somebody's number 1 or even number 2, no, scratch that. If you're not somebody's number 1, you can't really progress that much further in the game. And that's the issue with Todd, is that he's nobody's number 1. His number 1 is Bayleigh, but Bayleigh's number 1 is not Todd. So that leaves Todd on a bit of an island. If somebody not on Todd's side in Victoria or Bayleigh don't win this upcoming HOH, or if the competition results get really unlucky, Todd is most likely going to be the one that goes home this week. Mind you, there is a high possibility of him winning a veto or just a competition in general to keep himself safe. I mean, we did literally see him win 2 back-to-back vetoes, so there definitely is a possibility of him winning a competition to keep himself safe. But in terms of his position, he just doesn't have anything going on around him. He doesn't really have the protection level that some of these other players have, and it leaves him the most vulnerable. With that being said, it's not horrible. Like, it's not like god awful, like, oh my god, he has nobody working for him. Like, he definitely does have allies who want to keep him in the game and would prefer to keep him in the game. It's just that nobody is looking to take him long term in this game, which is where I struggle with his current position. I do think he has the ability to make it further, but he is going to have to depend on some competition wins and a little bit of luck in how other people do in competitions, which doesn't give me the most confidence about him. But it's not the worst thing in the world. But in the context of the current makeup of the house, unfortunately, he has to be the worst. And here he sits at number 5. At number 4, I have Lexus. And it's a bit shocking having Lexus here, but honestly, it's really not that surprising. I mean, her losing Tola this week was an absolute detriment to her game. I mean, Tola was a huge, and I mean huge, shield for her. So with Tola being gone, Lexus really doesn't have any protections outside of that. Technically, you could say Anthony is a shield, but who's going to target Anthony before Lexus? If we were talking like in the beginning of this game, like the pre-jury phase of the game, I would say like, yeah, that's completely reasonable. But people have just been playing circles around Lexus at this point in terms of building social capital. Lexus really only has Anthony, meaning that if anybody on Victoria's side were to win HOH, Lexus is most likely the primary target, which is horrible for her. And I feel like she's in a bit of a position like Todd, where she's going to have to win some competitions in this endgame in order to keep herself safe. Mind you, the reason I have her higher above Todd is because I think she at least has people who do have her in high considerations. I think Anthony definitely wants to take her much further in this game as compared to somebody like a Todd. But still, that's only one person, and even then, in this final 5, Lexus is technically in the minority in a 3-2 or 3-2. So that does give me some concerns, but I think Lexus actually does have a decent shot at making it to the end of this game. I just think if somebody like a Bayleigh were to win an HOH, that'd be absolutely horrible for her, because obviously she would be the primary target in that sense. But I think Lexus's connection with Anthony is going to do her pretty good moving into this final stretch of the game. However, if things do get unlucky for her in terms of competition results, that definitely does concern me, and I hope that things don't actually come out to that, because that would be horrible for her. But overall, I think Lexus is in a bit of a precarious, a little tumultuous, a bit of a fragile position, all things considered, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, and especially not the worst thing in this makeup of the house, which is why I have her here at number 4. At number 3, I surprisingly have Bayleigh, and I was not expecting Bayleigh to be this high. I've been saying for a pretty long time that Bayleigh has been super loyal to the women's side of the house and like Victoria's side. And I think that's been hurting her social capital. However, what makes her different than somebody like a Tola and staying loyal to her allies is that she's actually branching out with the other side of the house. She actually has built a really solid connection with Anthony. And we saw that in the episodes where Anthony says that obviously he considers Victoria his number one. But then he has a tie between Bayleigh and Lexus, which is shocking to me because it's like, really? You've been working with Lexus this entire game, but now Bayleigh's tied with her? That's honestly insane to me, which is kudos to Bayleigh for being able to build that social bond with him. Kudos to Bayleigh for being able to build that social bond with him and solidify that capital, because now she's in a very solid position where I don't think she's anybody's immediate target. I think she's actually set up pretty fairly well for this endgame. I think she could be in a very decent position to make it to final 3. If things get a little unlucky for her, she definitely could be sniped out in like the final 4. But in terms of like immediate targets, I don't think that's the case. The worst case scenario for her is like if somebody like a Lexus wins HOH and then Todd wins Veto, then that would probably guarantee that Bayleigh is the one going home. However, those are very extraneous circumstances, and I don't think things are immediately going to come to that. So I think Bayleigh is actually pretty set up fairly well in terms of these endgame results. As long as some competitions go her way, I do think she has a very solid chance of making it to the end. Do I think she's going to make final 2? I have no idea. She does have those like people who want to take her far, but they don't necessarily want to take her to the end. And by the end, I mean the final 2. So that does concern me a little bit. However, Bayleigh is not being considered a target in any sense in this upcoming round, or in like these upcoming rounds, I should say. So that does give me some confidence about her game, which is why I have her here at number 3. At number 2, I have Victoria. And Victoria is set up great for this endgame. I mean, technically speaking, she is in the majority of numbers. She has herself, Bayleigh, and Todd. That's 3 against Anthony's 2. Victoria's technically in the majority. She also has that really solid connection with Anthony from the vets. So Victoria's pretty primed for this endgame. However, the reason I don't have her at number 1 is because she's not in as much control of the house as she thinks she is. Yes, she has the numbers, but she doesn't have the influence that Anthony does. And I think that does concern me because that shows that she is losing a little bit of control in the game. And that is slowly leaking into the jury house. Seeing in exit interviews how people like Tola are pretty bitter against Victoria and her gameplay shows that there is a growing anti-Victoria sentiment in that they don't really like the chaos that she's been sowing in the house. The seeds of doubt she's been placing haven't been effective in any sense, which is ruining her capital a little bit. So if this chaos truly does begin to fester and start to evolve more and more, Victoria could be shattering her chances at a win when she is literally primed, and I mean primed, to get to the end. She can obviously win the competitions to get herself to the end, but she has the social capital to make it super deep. Like I would be a little remiss to say that I think she's nearly guaranteed final 2. There's a lot of people in this game who would take her to final 2, and that makes it great for her. However, the lack of control that she's starting to have in this game is a bit concerning, and I wish that she were to solidify things a little bit more, which would give me a little bit more confidence in her. However, there is some groundwork being laid against her, which could like manifest itself later on, which does raise some concerns for me. However, her position currently in the game is great. She has solid allies around her, and I think she's primed to make it to the end, which is why I have her here at number 2. Now at number 1, the person I believe to be in the best position in the house is Anthony. And even though Anthony doesn't have the numbers that Victoria has, Anthony makes up for that in the control and influence he has. Yes, he only has Lexus. And yes, either himself or Lexus are probably going to need to win some of these endgame competitions to guarantee that they make it to the end. That is an inevitability for them. However, I think Anthony actually has a lot of really decent social capital to get himself to the end. The only weak link he really doesn't have is Todd. But even then, he still has a pretty solid repertoire with Todd. Maybe not in the sense that like Todd would take Anthony to like final 3, final 2 in that sense, but still Todd doesn't want to target Anthony immediately, which is great for him. And in consideration of everybody else, Anthony has a final 2 with Lexus. Anthony has a final 2 with Victoria. And Anthony has a near final 3 deal with Bayleigh. So all in all, it seems like Anthony is actually primed to do very well in this endgame. My only concern is that these competitions that he needs to win, I don't know if he can win them. He's he's bad at competitions. Like, I feel like that's a pretty apparent running gag in the Big Brother Canada community, is that Anthony sucks at competitions. And even though he's like claiming that like, oh, he's been throwing every single competition, I feel like some of these he's just like genuinely bad at. You know, so I definitely am concerned for him in that sense. However, he has the most options going into this endgame. You know, even though he doesn't have the numerical majority in that he is in a 3-2 deficit against the Victoria side in terms of like pure numbers, I think in terms of options, I think Anthony has the most open, which does give me a lot of confidence about his endgame positioning. My only concern besides the competition wins is that is anybody going to take him to the end? I think Victoria will. That definitely makes sense. But everybody else, I don't know if they'll take him to the end. And he might need to win himself to the end. I'm saying that Anthony has the options to get to the end, but will those options actually take him to the end? Is the only thing. Like, I think he'll make final 3, but will he make final 2? And that's the most important thing. So there definitely are some concerns in that sense. However, all of the options he has open are really solid, and they give me a lot of confidence about his game, which is why I have him here at number 1. Overall, despite this week having the double eviction and it meant to be like chaotic and uncontrollable in that sense, this was actually a pretty tame week of Big Brother Canada, all things considered. I mean, the strategy was pretty straightforward. There was no really big dynamic shifts in any sense. The sides really solidified themselves against one another in a bit of a boring and bland way. And I don't really think the strategy evolved this week in any major sense. No major developments were made. This was actually a pretty straightforward week. It's pretty basic in all things considered, and that does worry me a little bit. The fact that we're losing steam right before the end game, like, this is the worst place to be losing steam. Like, I feel like, if anything, we should be building up to the peak of this, like, finale. But the fact that we're losing steam does concern me a little bit. And I sincerely apologize for making this video seem a lot shorter than I typically make them. I would love to go in much more detail and depth. However, I am just feeling super under the weather, and these allergies are making me feel absolutely miserable. And I want to get this video out on time. So I sincerely apologize for this video seeming a little bit rushed, a little bit not as detailed as I typically go into, but I have to look out for my physical health in that sense, and so I truly apologize for that. But in regards to the game of Big Brother Canada, I hope things pick up steam before this end game, and I hope we come out with an exciting finale, just like how I hope I pick up steam in my energy, and how I hope that I can survive to see this finale. But those are my thoughts. Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you have any of those. And I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.